This is Reaching for the Moon, Chapters 1 and 2, A Historical Context, with Mrs. Anderson. The book opens in White Sulphur Springs, Virginia. White Sulphur Springs is a rural community set in the Allegheny Mountains. This town still exists today, and it looks very similar today as it did at that time. White Sulphur Springs is known for their very famous hotel called the Greenbrier Hotel. It opened in 1778. It sits on 11,000 acres. 26 presidents have vacationed there, including Dwight Eisenhower, and it's still in operation today. Here is their modern commercial. The Greenbrier Hotel, before the Civil War, was known as Old White. Here is a front view of what it looks like today. The Greenbrier Hotel today is also a place for hosting international meetings and foreign dignitaries. During Katherine Johnson's childhood, African Americans were allowed to work there, but they couldn't rent a room and stay there because segregation was still legal. Today, a typical room at the Greenbrier Hotel will run you about $4,500 per night. These chapters also mention the Dred Scott decision. Here's an actual picture of Dred Scott. He was born in 1799 and he died in 1858. He was born a slave, and he lived for a while in a state that was a free state, and he felt that because he had stayed there a certain amount of time, he should have his freedom. So he ended up suing for his personal freedom, but he also sued on behalf of his wife and his 2 children. Unfortunately, he did not win the lawsuit, and the Supreme Court of the United States ruled that no one of African ancestry can claim citizenship in the U.S. This is his family. We have Dred Scott, his wife Harriet, and their 2 daughters, Eliza and Lily. Another case that was important during this time that she mentions is Plessy versus Ferguson. This happened on May 18, 1896. The Supreme Court established that separate but equal facilities between the races did not violate constitutional rights. This made segregation legal. Hence, we began seeing signs that separated the races, such as colored and white, for waiting rooms, for bathrooms, and for water fountains especially. Katherine Johnson was born in 1918, right before the Roaring Twenties, which was a decade of economic prosperity. We had a huge technology boom. Cars were in fashion, telephones, we had film, radio, and other electrical appliances that were now in fashion. Also in fashion was new dresses and hats and attire for women, and the latest dance crazes.
This dance.
On October 29, 1929, at the end of a decade of prosperity, the stock market crashed. We had a significant loss of wealth among investors as a result, and there was great panic on Wall Street. This woman, Florence Owens Thompson, became a symbol of the Great Depression, which followed immediately after the stock market crashed. It lasted from 1929 to 1933. It was a severe worldwide economic depression. 15 million people were unemployed in America, and half of all American banks ran out of money. As a result, women began to become very creative with the resources that they had. For example, at that time, grocery stores sold flour and sugar in cloth sacks. So these fabric sacks at one point were just very plain with the logo stamped on the front. However, Companies began to realize that women were saving these fabric sacks and making clothing out of them. So, out of pure kindness, they began to print fanciful patterns on the cloth so that women could have nice dresses. They also allowed for their label to be a wash-out label. So after a few washes, the label would not be seen and you would just have the pretty print from the cloth. Here is an example of a flour sack dress that did not have a fancy print. This was the plain sack that the flour or sugar came in. In this case, it looks like Pillsbury flour. Also, to the left, you see Parade brand flour in a fanciful print. This woman and her daughter have actually made a dress out of the Parade brand flour sack. Flour sacks were also common to use for aprons. And other flour sack fashions, once they began to put prints on it, weren't so bad. So here's an image of 4 ladies who's wearing flour sack fashions from that era. Here are some examples of young people wearing flour sack fashions that did not have the fancy print on it. You see there's a big difference, and there's certainly no hiding the fact that you were wearing a flour sack. In the middle of chapter 2, we read about her family transitioning from White Sulphur Springs to go to West Virginia Colored Institute. This was so Katherine and her siblings could have an education that was higher than 7th grade. President John Davis was then the president at West Virginia Colored Institute. He actually met up with Katherine's father. Katherine's father asked him for a job, and President John Davis could not give him one. As a result, Katherine's father went back home to White Sulphur Springs. It was 122 miles away. And he lived there and worked there. The whole family worked. It was all hands on deck. And for the next 8 years, they were separated. But in the end, they did manage to graduate. This is a picture of West Virginia Colored Institute in the year that Katherine attended. Another key person mentioned is W.E.B. Du Bois. He was born in 1868 and he died in 1963. He believed that 10% of African Americans should go to college and seek to become leaders in their communities, like presidents and politicians and people who own businesses, things like that. These leaders would be called the talented 10. He wrote an essay regarding this concept. He was the founding member of the NAACP, and he opposed the views set forth by Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington was born in 1856 and he died in 1915. He was the founder of the Tuskegee Institute, and he believed that African Americans should remain separate from whites in social activities. He also felt that African Americans should seek to obtain jobs that they are more likely to get, such as agricultural, farm work, and domestic work. The NAACP is still known today as the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. It is a civil rights organization that was established in 1909. Today, its mission in the 21st century is to ensure the political, educational, social, and economic equality of rights of all persons and to eliminate race-based discrimination. These are the key cultural events mentioned in chapters 1 and 2 of Reaching for the Moon, the autobiography of NASA mathematician Katherine Johnson.